in your guidelines, or do you leave this entirely on decision of member states? And second question, do you see any chance that people might be able to travel on holiday also to countries outside the Schengen or member states? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Johansson.
Yes, of course, the Commission can't lift these border restrictions. It's Member State who will lift border restrictions. And what we present today is guidelines on how to do that in a coordinated way. So it's the Member State who have to assess the situation and to see whether it's appropriate to lift border restrictions or not. But when they think it's time to lift border restriction, then I hope they will follow the guidelines that we have presented today. And yes, I think that it's time this is for the whole EU area, not only for the Schengen area.
Can I, maybe I should,
yes,
I think I should add something on travelling outside the European Union. We have to recognize the fact that the situation in different states around the world is different. Of course, epidemiologically speaking, on measures taken by national authorities in those respective member states. And while companies, transport operators can choose to open a destination, I think it is absolutely essential that someone who would like to buy a ticket to an outside European member state to be very well informed on the conditions on the ground there. I advise a lot of caution, because we have seen at the beginning of the crisis so many stranded European citizens in faraway destinations for various purposes being there, and we had to organize very difficult operations to try to repatriate everyone. So I would advise cautious at this stage. Thank you.
If I may, of course, we need to all realise that the resumption of cross-border travel and deconfinement is not going to be risk-free. We need to be open and honest about this, but this is why we have put forward the criteria that one needs to take into account, and the member states need to take into account when they're opening up and when they're moving forward towards tourism, and citizens need to be aware of it. So it is very important that the epidemiological situation is taken into account, along with the other factors that I have already mentioned, including health care capacity, testing capacity, contact tracing, and of course the information to travellers. So it is important that all these factors are taken into account when member states are taking their decisions to lift travel restrictions and of course to open up to tourism. Thank you.
Many thanks, Commissioners. Now I would like to give the floor to Javier Espinosa. Javier.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
I'd like to know, there were some suggestions in the UK yesterday that as countries look to create sort of bilateral agreements so that their citizens can travel freely during the summer, that the EU might somehow be able to block UK citizens to travel to France specifically. So that's my first question, whether there's any substance to that. And secondly, today we're writing about one of the top judges. This is a bit separate to the subject, I understand this, in Germany, warning that the EU infringement proceedings against Berlin over the court's ruling on the ECB could basically lead to Europe into a legal crisis. I wonder if you could comment. Thank you.
Yeah, I can answer the first one. The UK residents are being treated the same way that EU residents are also this year during this transition period. So that will not be they will not be excluded from open borders or removing of border restrictions. But what is very clear is that all member states have to act in a non-discriminatory way. That means it's not possible to open your borders only for citizens from a specific country. If you open a border, then it's open for all EU citizens and including UK residents to cross this border. So it's not possible to make this discrimination to say just according to their passport.
Many thanks. Javier, as to your second question, I would like to inform you that the briefing or the press conference today is limited to the scope of the tourism and transport package. And now we move to Paula Tama.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, thank you. My two questions are for Commissioner Johansson. So I wonder, you say discrimination on the basis of passport or citizenship is illegal under EU law, but on the basis of residence, and if that's based on a scientific assessment of the epidemiological situation, that would be okay. So I wonder, what is the legal basis of that? And the second question is it legal for a EU country to deny entry to its passport-carrying citizen? To my knowledge, this is not legal, but at the moment, member states like Italy are denying entry to citizens, and it's disruptive. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't really hear everything, but it's every member state, of course, have to let their own citizens into their country. This is very clear. You are not allowed to block your own citizens for entering their own country. And when it comes to a border, what we say here in our guidelines is that we invite member states to assess the epidemiological situation. We say that if there is the situation is improving and it's more or less a similar level, and when their healthcare capacity and the other criteria that we have mentioned are fulfilled, then they should lift their border restrictions. They might do it in a step-by-step way, maybe not for the whole region, maybe not for every travel, but step by step. And when it's open, it has to be open for everybody, not everybody, all EU citizens that want to cross this border. Then you can't make any distinction according to the passport. But it's not necessary to lift all borders, because there could be a different situation. One border could have a similar situation on the other part of the border, but in another part of the country there could be another situation, and where you are waiting to lift the restrictions until the situation has improved even more. So that is possible, but not to make to treat different EU citizens differently according to the nationality.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Now we would like to move to Tommaso Lecca.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So I have two questions. The first one is for Commissioner Johansson, and it's still on the non-discrimination principle. I would like to understand if member states will be allowed to open the border just on one way. So let's say, for example, if a country like Portugal wants to accept people coming from Spain into its territory, but doesn't want its citizens to go to Spain. If the two countries agree on such terms, can they go for this option? And just a second question, just a quick one for Commissioner Valean. During the first press conference, the Vice President Vestager announced that the Commission sent letters to more than 10 countries which are not respecting the right of the passengers to get full reimbursement in case of cancellation. May we know which countries, which member states are receiving this letter? Thank you.
So answer the first question. So, of course, the member state can only decide on its own borders. And we already have a lot of examples in the member states where one member state have border restriction and the member state on the other side of the border do not have border restrictions or border controls. So that's already the case. So member states can only decide on their own borders, of course. But we recommend that they do it together with the member states on the other side of the border. I think that will make things much easier. And this is really what I'm seeing happening now with the dialogues that member states have with each other. So I do hope so, but they cannot decide on other member states' borders.
Member States are the primary responsible for implementing the European legislation. Now, with the adoption of our recommendation on vouchers, I decided to write a letter with Commissioner Reinders to all Member States to remind them on their obligation to make sure that the passengers' rights are respected. Also to draw their attention on the various possibilities they have to support the voucher system to make it more attractive for passengers, so that if someone chooses to do so, to opt for a voucher. And of course, you asked me to whom? To everyone, because it is a pan-European issue. And of course, we are hoping that this will stimulate the Member States to act accordingly with determination and speed.
Commissioner Kyriakides?
If I may come in on the question that Ylva had, and I just wanted to add from our perspective, from the health safety perspective, that we're in very close coordination with all the health ministers every week, and we expect that any measures taken will be taking into account this information. We're setting out a framework today, and that they need to move forward in the lifting of any internal borders and for tourism in a coordinated way. So I believe that this is extremely important, that these meetings continue to happen, that also that health ministers between themselves, taking into account the framework that we are proposing, we're setting out today, move forward in a coordinated way.
May I just add, the ministers have asked for this coordination, so we are doing it because they want us to do it.
Many thanks. Now we move to Tommaso Giallavotti.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for this press conference. Just two questions, if I may. On the basis of what has been said until now, are you basically saying to European citizens that they can forget their holidays for this summer? First question. And the second one is on the quarantine measures which continue to still to be applied by member states, even if they have similar epidemiological situations, such as Italy and Belgium, for example. If you commute between Italy and Belgium, you have to do 2 weeks of quarantine in Italy and 2 weeks of quarantine in Belgium, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Are you going to apply moral suasion, at least on Belgium, as it hosts the European institutions? Thank you.
Commissioner
the first one, no, we're not asking Europeans to forget their holidays. I think after what has this huge impact of this pandemic on everybody's life, people are looking forward to some sort of the ability to, if not take a holiday, to visit loved ones, to meet loved ones, and just to have some space and time for themselves. What we are saying, though, and we need to be clear in our messages, that these are going to be different types of holidays, and we need to plan the way we move forward differently, putting safety, public health safety, but also every individual citizen's safety first. Primarily, and I think that this we mustn't ever forget, that all the sacrifices that citizens have been taking for the last few months in terms of the change in their everyday life, the way that it has impacted on their economies, these do not go to waste because we don't act in a responsible way. So I think this is the answer I would give. And for the second answer, yes, I'm aware that some member states have quarantine measures. This is, of course, something that is a member states' decision. But I would say, and we would say, that providing that member states have in place what we have already said, that they have a very close monitoring of the epidemiology, they have their health system capacity, good monitoring, testing capacity, contact tracing, then possibly if member states know that other member states have equally these measures in place, then they wouldn't be necessary to have quarantine. So I think the importance here here is to have these criteria in place and to have a good sharing of information so that they are able to then allow movement and to move forward with the tourism. Thank you.
Thank you. It's okay.
I have nothing to add. I think Stella already answered the questions.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to give the floor to Caroline Beisel. Caroline?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Hello, thanks for this press conference. First of all, I would like to get a clarification because after Commissioner Valean's answer regarding this letter, there's some confusion, as we can clearly see in the chat of journalists on our screen, because Commissioner Vestager clearly stated that the letter was to be sent to 12 specific member states who are currently in breach of consumer rights. So if we could get a clarification from that, on that. The second question is for Commissioner Kyriakides. Can you explain us from an epidemiological point of view, are border controls an adequate response to fight the virus? And the third one is for Commissioner Johansson. In the communication doesn't mention at all the Schengen Borders Code, and I wonder if the Commission thinks that the way the controls are handled right now are adhering to the Schengen Borders Code, because in Article 28 there's this time frame from maximum 2 months, and I wonder if the Commission is looking at that and what will happen after those 2 months have passed. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Valean, please.
Yes, well, I'm not quite aware what my colleague, Madam Vestager, said, but I can assure you that my intention is to send a letter to everyone, because through these recommendations we are addressing member states who would play a very important role, for example, in guaranteeing the vouchers. So a lot of how to make a voucher more attractive would depend on the member states. So we would like very much to clarify with them and encourage them to use this system. And of course, we'll mention again that they have to apply generally the law, the European law on air passenger rights and on travel package, directive on travel package. So this is not an infringement letter. We do not evaluate at this stage who is in infringement. Let's call it a letter of encouragement to apply smoothly and quickly the European legislation in terms of reimbursement of passengers or offering a more attractive voucher system. So I'm determined to send a letter to everyone. This is my answer.
Thank you. Commissioner Kyriakides now.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. We don't consider border controls as an effective measure to stop the transmission of the virus. Of course, I'm aware that in some member states they use temperature checks, but the discussions with ECDC doesn't really show evidence that this is an effective way of limiting the transmission. For example, it's extremely easy for someone to take medication before crossing over and to make sure that they don't have a temperature. So what we are proposing, and this is what I would like us to really advocate, is a phased and coordinated approach that starts by lifting controls between regions and member states with sufficient similar epidemiological situations. And this would mean that the level of transmission is sufficiently low in both countries so that travelling between the two doesn't necessarily increase the risk of the virus spreading, providing that both countries also hold to the other measures that we have really, I think each and every one of us know by now, which means physical distancing, hand hygiene, respiratory etiquette. Everything else has to be in place. So it's not just crossing into another country, from one country or region to another, but everything else has to be in place so that we minimise the risk of spreading the virus. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I can answer this. let's be clear that these border controls that has been put in place in many member states in Schengen countries, they are a result of a pandemic where the virus that we do not know so much about and where we are lacking vaccine. I see no willingness from the member states to keep these border controls longer than necessary. Everybody would like to get rid of them. But of course, member states are in different phases when it comes to the epidemiological situation, to the containment measures, to the healthcare capacity. So this is what we need to come out of this now, and that's why we are presenting these guidelines. And this has been welcomed, I think, from the member states, that we are helping them step by step to come back to a normal situation. But we have to take into account, we can't just follow an approach that we set up, this step will be taken. We have to measure it all the time to find out whether the situation is being worse. Hope not, but if so, we need to be able to make amendments. So this could be on border checks, could be on other measures, of course. So this is not, there's no member states that would like to have these kind of border controls longer than necessary for health reasons.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now we move to Jorge Valero.
Morning. I have two questions as well. A follow-up on the quarantine. Given that you don't recommend the blanket quarantines, but taking into account the situation of Spain, would you recommend a quarantine for all travelers arriving from the EU, as the government is going to impose us from Friday? And for Commissioner Valean, two questions. First of all, please, if you could clarify what is the situation with this letter to member states, because your colleague, Commissioner Vestager, he was clear saying that this letter was going to be an infringement procedure, the first step of an infringement procedure. And you just said now that this letter is not going to be the first step. So if you could clarify that. And a second question on the empty spaces, empty seats in airplanes. An early draft of your recommendation said clearly that the empty seats were not recommended, that other measures will be sufficient. That paragraph disappeared in the final draft, so I would like to clarify, if you could clarify whether you recommend that or not. Thank you.
Maybe we start with Commissioner Valean.
Yes, so again, as I said earlier, I understand that Madam Vestager was referring to infringement. This is something we will do in the moment in which we will assess in what member states the law is not applied. The intention of my letter, to be sent together with Commissioner Reinders, is to clarify again for the member states the steps they could take in order to make the voucher system more attractive. So to encourage in this way the passengers who have a cancelled trip to opt for a voucher. So first is my letter, which is going to be addressed to all member states to clarify new ways of making the voucher system more attractive and reminding them that the obligation of organizer or companies is to reimburse if the passenger or customer would wish to have its money back. And then the second option would be the vouchers, which might be made more attractive, including by the member states if they set up guaranteeing schemes. So this is the first letter. Of course, we are the guardians of the treaty, and we are looking at how member states are implementing legislation. And if these situations of infringing the European law will emerge in various member states, of course we are determined to take steps, but this will be, I would say, a different letter, a letter of infringement, a different letter than the one I'm going to send to Commissioner Reinders tomorrow.
Commissioner Kyriakides?
Yes, thank you. Now, I have already said the decision concerning quarantine measures are decisions that, of course, are taken by member states. But we consider that if the measures of containment are taken in two different countries and two different member states are as much as possible satisfactory and aligned, then there should not be a need to impose quarantine on people when people arrive. So ultimately, this is about the public health measures that are being taken in member states, but it is a decision taken by member states whether they have quarantine or not.
Thank you. Commissioner Valean, would you like to add?
I forgot to answer the second part of the second question about the empty seats in the airplanes. Of course, this was a cross-sectorial exercise with other commissioners. We had to integrate opinion. We discussed with stakeholders, with the industry, with member states. So it was a process, and the document was evolving in time. So I wouldn't know what so-called draft you have seen. We are not recommending right now specifically to have empty seats in airplanes. The so-called empty seats would go with the social distancing or the physical distancing in the airplanes, and we are not necessarily recommending it because, by one hand, the aircraft, we know they have some security features like air filtering, hospital grade, or the flow of air is vertical, and there is a long-standing capacity of the aviation sector to put in place safety protocols and regulation. We are nevertheless recommending to wear a mask and other protective equipment, also for the crews, for the passengers. We have other protocols in place in boarding and deboarding. And we have been asking EASA, which is the European Safety Agency for Aviation, together with ECDC and other relevant European institutions, to go more in depth in the technical requirements for traveling by airplane to see if additional measures to mitigate the risks are needed.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now I would like to give the floor to Thomas Gučke. Thomas?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. My question goes first and foremost to Commissioner Kyriakides. You've said that the level of virus transmission needs to be sufficiently low for countries to reopen their borders. Now, how exactly do you measure that? What does sufficiently low mean? And I'm asking that having in mind that until now ECDC hasn't even come up with this map. It's just a few countries reporting, and even when they are reporting, there is no big differentiation. It's between clusters and community transmission, but on the national level, we have set specific targets, like 50 infections per 100,000 people. So is the Commission intending to become more precise and to give more guidance on that to member states? First question. Second question, please. Are you in favor of obligatory testing for people who want to cross the border? So either the classic COVID-19 tests or antibody tests. Thank you.
There are three questions. I think they're for me to pick up. The first one concerning the epidemiological situation. The overall trend at the moment, as you know, across the EU member states, is that the situation the numbers are declining. What we have said and we are saying is that the numbers not only need to be declined, but also there needs to be a stabilization of the numbers. And this information is, of course, as transparent as possible. ECDC is presently collecting this information for a subnational level as well from member states, so that it will be available and citizens can access so that they know what regions, not only what member states that they are travelling to and what regions they can be travelling to. It is extremely important that we are able to align as much as possible this information, and we are doing this in close cooperation with ECDC. The second question, I think, has two parts in terms of checks or I'm not sure if I understood correctly, going into across borders in terms of certificates. There is no currently scientific, reliable and satisfactory scientific evidence to support immunity passports and serological testing. In terms of whether there will be COVID-19 tests to see if someone, for someone to have had it before travelling, there are, of course, this is a member state's decision, but I would say that both ECDC and WHO have also highlighted to us the risks of this, because someone can test for COVID-19 today and be negative and be travelling in 2 days and have been infected. So what is really important, and I'm sorry to have to come back to it, but I think that we need to understand that what is really important is what we have in place when someone is travelling, when someone enters a member state, for the member state to be able to respond to a possible increase in a number of cases, and for this to be as transparent as possible for those travelling. So again, healthcare capacity, testing, contact tracing and information are crucial in terms of us moving into the next phase. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Johansson, would you like to add? No? No? Okay. Then we move to the next question, which comes from Mark Pieperkorn.
Yes, thanks a lot. Good afternoon. First question to Commissioner Johansson regarding the principle of non-discrimination. What is the Commission going to do if a member state does discriminate on the basis of passport and someone wants to cross the border? Second question to Commissioner Valean, still regarding this letter, because if I remember well, your colleague Vestager said that the letters of infringement, the first step, has been and will be sent today. So it's not something else like we first going to send a letter of encouragement and then maybe in the future we will send the second letter. No, she said it will be sent today. So can you explain this to us, please? Thanks.
I can answer very quickly. If a member state do not apply to EU law, the Commission can always act. That's our role, but I see no such intents. So I do think that member states are happy to have these guidelines, and we, of course, will help them to implement this in a good way in all member states.
Well, I'm sorry, I think I answered to that. I was a bit taken by surprise by this comment made by my colleague, Madame Vestager, because the letter itself is prepared by me and Cabinet Reinders and is going to be sent as soon as possible, maybe even today, if not tomorrow, to all member states to explain our thinking on how to make vouchers more attractive as an alternative for citizens who does not have a pressing liquidity problem to opt for them. And since these measures we are recommending are involving the member states themselves in putting in place guarantee schemes against the insolvencies of companies to guarantee the vouchers, an active dialogue with the companies in order to suggest improvements to the system of vouchers, I consider, and the same as my colleague Mr. Reinders, it's fair enough to start with this letter, and then of course in the parallel we will see if the legislation on air passenger rights or the directive is not rightfully applied by some member states. We will have infringement procedure as usual for the European Commission when we see legislation is not applied. But I would say the first letter is going to be one with explanation and encouragements.
Thank you again for this clarification, Commissioner Valean. And now we move to David Carreta.
Yes, hello, David Carretta, Radio Radicale. Thank you for this opportunity, and sorry, Commissioner Valean, but I have to come back to the letter question. Yesterday we were told by your services that you know that 12 member states are in breach of the EU legislation. So today we have asked to Vice President Vestager what was this letter about, and she told us that it was an infringement. So you know already now that they are in infringement. I'm wondering why you are still waiting to open this procedure, this infringement procedure. Do you think that the liquidity problem of airline companies that are benefiting from billions of public money, state aid, money of taxpayer, are more important than the liquidity problem of families, households, individuals? Because that's the point. If you can explain us your position as Commissioner and how is possible that a college do not have a single position on that as a college. Second question, if I may, to Commissioner Kyriakides. I have the impression that we are back again to the beginning of the month of March, when the Commission was advising Member States to have standard on the epidemiological situation and so on, how to evaluate the risk and so on. The problem is that after 2 months, we don't have standards, EU standards. Each member state has his standard to evaluate their national situation. Do you think that this is credible to let member states do what they want to do, in fact, on health issue? Thank you.
Maybe we start with Commissioner Kyriakides.
Yes, of course. Well, I will start by saying that with all respect, I don't believe we're at the beginning of where we were with the beginning of March. We have learned a great deal over the last 2 months, and a great deal has changed. There is a great deal of coordination happening on a weekly basis with member states and health ministers. We have together shared the Commission guidelines on testing strategies, on containment measures, and of course member states are the ones that are taking the decisions in terms of, as they did in the putting forward of the containment measures according to ECDC and WHO guidelines. But now they are also looking and working with us after putting forward the roadmap to exit. Every member state is at a different stage in this curve of this pandemic, and so it is understandable that they will be taking the decisions according to their national, to their epidemiological data. But there is a great deal of coordination going on between member states and with the Commission, and we're going to be taking this forward, of course, now in this new phase of the lifting of the confinement measures. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe Commissioner Valean has already provided clarification on your first question, David, but I will ask her if she wants to add something, or...
I should repeat myself. I think we should not confuse the fact that even recently a lot of member states, not 12 but 15, asked us to act upon vouchers system with the fact that everyone is infringing the legislation. So we are still in the process of assessing if and where this infringement procedure is actually occurring. In the meantime, I want to reassure all the passengers that their rights are defended by the European Commission. They are good and still in place. So to remind them, first, they have the right to be reimbursed for a ticket which was not used. If a company would like to offer vouchers or other services, this can be attractive by several measures, a box of measures we have proposed today to the member states and to the companies to take them on board and offer better and more attractive services through a voucher system. But the rights of passengers are in place. They are going to be respected, and we will take all the necessary measures to make sure that this will be the case.
Thank you very much. Next in line is Oliver Grimm.
Hi, do you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, do you hear me? Super. Sorry, I still have to ask for clarifications on several issues that were raised. First one to Commissioner Johansson. Of course, discrimination on the basis of passport is not allowed. But at the same time, you say regions, bordering regions with similar health situations might open up. So does that mean, for example, if Austria and Germany decide that, well, their corona situation is similar, so we open up the border, would then any EU citizen living in these two countries, so Spaniards, Danes, Swedes and so forth, Romanians, also be allowed to travel between these two? That is the key question. Or could at some point the Austrians, for example, say we're only interested in German tourists because they might make up such a huge chunk of our tourism industry. You need a German passport in order to come in July and August. And the second question, sorry, still to Commissioner Valean, your own services yesterday told us that about 12 member states are in breach of consumer law, okay? So, and actually the consumer rights are not being respected because people are not being reimbursed. They don't get their money back, to which they're entitled to. You tell us you are looking into the situation, and I do think this is not satisfactory to the citizens of Europe. So please, give us a clarification. If an airline doesn't reimburse, or if a holiday organizer doesn't reimburse its clients now in cash, not in a voucher, in money, in actual cash, is that within EU law or is it in breach of EU law? Thank you.
Commissioner Johansson.
The answer to your first question is yes. The answer to your second question is no.
Very clear.
So back to this issue. It's obvious that we have reports, and we are receiving reports at our services, in the media. I myself am getting a lot of letters from citizens who are, let's say, discouraged or postponed in getting their reimbursement. So this is a real situation. That's why we are actually acting. What I said is that right now we are proposing to the member states, who are the first one called to make sure that the legislation is implemented, to bring these companies in line with their obligations. And citizens, of course, they have all the instruments at their national level, even European instruments through European Centre for Consumers, to address this issue of reimbursement. What we did is to protect and keep this right high, even under the pressure from companies and member states who would like to have this legislation modified in order to make vouchers an option which can be offered from the very beginning. And we stood still, and we didn't renounce to this. We defended the European legislation. But this is a situation we are talking about a couple of weeks here. The situation is very fluid. Now we proposed for the member states also ways out from the liquidity problems with their companies, so on and so forth, by having guaranteeing the vouchers, having various instruments to make the vouchers more attractive. So I really hope, because we are all in a crisis together, I really hope that very soon all these problems will be solved with the primary hand of the member states, because it's up to them to make their companies to apply the law. So if this will not be the case, then of course we will have infringements, probably very soon. But right now, I'm willing to send them this letter explanatory on how they can make vouchers more attractive for their citizens, and then we will see very soon which are the cases, actual cases of breaching the law, and we will start infringements. We are not infringing the companies. We have to see where systematic in a member state the companies or operators are not respecting their obligation under the European law. We need to define this systematic. We have to understand the volumes of the phenomena depending on each member state. So that's why I said I wouldn't put a number or a figure right now now on the number of member states which would be in infringement. We have to see which is the level and which are the cases. And if my services said 12, probably they have something in mind, but it would be very interesting to clarify myself with them what was the criteria on which they advanced this number, because it's one thing to receive an email from a citizen and it's another thing to have a phenomena attached to a member state. So different cases, so maybe different numbers of member states. So let's see, first our letter to explain what they need to do immediately, again reminding them on their obligation to implement the air passengers' rights and the travel package. And if in the meantime we'll evaluate exactly what is the volume of this situation depending on the member states, and we'll start infringement procedure. That would be sure.
Thanks, Commissioner. As we need to wrap up, we'll take 3 more questions. And I believe that the issue related to the letters has been exhausted, so please keep your hand raised only if you have a question on another topic. I wait for a moment. Then I give the floor to Maria Psara. Maria, please.
Hello?
Hello, yeah.
Can you hear me, please?
Yes.
Hello, Maria Psara with Euronews and Open TV Greece. I would like to ask you, I didn't hear anything about the travelers who want to go outside the EU, or for the international passengers that want to come to the EU for holidays. I know that the borders outside the EU are closed in 15th of June, but I would like your recommendation on this. And what will happen if one country opens its borders after the 15th of June to travelers from countries like the US and China? Is there any recommendation for that? Thank you very much.
Question. We have no recommendation on the external border yet. I think that we need to start that discussion, but we are not there yet. I think that the way we go step by step is that member states start to open up internally in their country, and then they start open up the internal border in the EU Schengen area, and then we need to go further on to how we would open up the external border, but we are not there yet, and we have no recommendation on that today.
Many thanks. So next is Isabelle Horry.
Bonjour, je vais poser ma question en français. Est-ce que y a un certain nombre de pays, la France, l'Allemagne, l'Autriche et la Suisse au moins, qui ont annoncé ou qui vont annoncer dans ces prochaines heures qu'ils comptent rouvrir leurs frontières complètement pour un retour à la normale le 15 juin. Et dans ce retour à la normale, visiblement, y compris le tourisme. Est-ce que vous étiez au courant? Quelle est votre réaction? Et puis, est-ce que c'est pas prématuré? D'ailleurs, ils n'auront pas forcément eu le temps de lire vos lignes directrices et vos recommandations.
No, I don't think it's premature. I think it's a good step. We must remember that there are still a lot of member states that didn't introduce any internal border controls. And some member states are now taking steps going back to normal. We have already seen it also in the Baltic states that are also taking this decision. So I think this is not premature. I expect that they have made the assessments and that they will do it in an orderly way. But I think this shows that our guidelines are not coming too early.
Thank you.
No, I would just support what Ylva said. It's not so much of the premature or not. It's a matter of all member states who I'm sure are taking these steps have ensured that they have the epidemiological criteria that they need and everything else in place in order to be able to move forward. And it is an important message also to citizens that having these in place, we are able to take another step forward in this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. For the last question, I would like to give the floor to Ernest Bungohi.
Yes, thank you. Aris Binduri from News Albania. Again on the issue of the third countries, but this time countries that find themselves within the European Union borders. I'm speaking about the Western Balkan countries, totally and completely interdependent and interlinked.
We don't hear you very well. Sorry. We don't hear you very well. Sorry.
Do you hear me? Hello, do you hear me now?
A bit better. No. So then, yes. It doesn't work. So then last question, Georgi Gotev.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello? Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, Georgi Gotev from Euractiv. I have a question about the relationship between health concerns and protectionism, and I will elaborate. In the case of Greece and Bulgaria, both countries have a strong touristic sector, and the coronavirus situation in both countries is about the same. Levels are quite low compared to countries in Western Europe. The Bulgarian Minister of Tourism said that Bulgarian tourists returning from Greece will need to spend 14 days of quarantine in their country. Well, this sounds very much like protectionism. That's why I would like to know, that is the Commission aware that sometimes health concerns could be used as a measure of protectionism, and what can the Commission do to prevent such abuse?
In terms of protecting public health, because that's in terms of protecting public health, these are measures that we are aware that member states are putting into place. We are also very positive that by putting out and setting out the framework that we have today on how member states can resume travelling in the safest way possible and how we can rethink the way we do tourism will enable them to move ahead without putting measures such as quarantine into place. But ultimately, it's the member states' decision. So I would leave it at that because I think I've already answered that.
Thank you very much. With that, we conclude our press conference. Many thanks for your attention and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.